Now from a very good friend of mine, Conservative MP and Shadow Defence Minister, Mark Francois. Mark, great to see you this morning.
Good morning.
You are a true Conservative to your core. When are you off to reform?
I'm not. The Conservative Party is my tribe. Down the years, sometimes my tribe has driven me mad. Sometimes my tribe has been unpleasant to me, for instance, during all the Brexit debates. But it's my tribe, and I'm not leaving it. And the lights in the Conservative Party, Mark, your views are well known, but the lights are still on, and they're staying on. Robert Jenrick was a friend of mine. I campaigned for him in the by-election years ago when he was first elected. I campaigned for him to be leader of the Conservative Party. I did my best to persuade other MPs and party members to vote for him. I feel desperately let down by what Robert did yesterday. Personally, really let down. And it's not just what he did, it's the way that he did it. When he resigned from the cabinet over the Rwanda bill because he thought it wasn't tough enough, and I voted against that bill as well at second reading, for the record. I agreed with the plan, I just thought the legislation had weaknesses. And I respected him for doing that. And that's one of the reasons I campaigned for him and voted for him to be leader, because he'd resigned from the cabinet on a point of principle. But that's not what I saw yesterday. Yesterday was an ego trip, sucking up to Nigel on television, and the thing that really got me was the way he abused his party and many of the people he'd worked with for years while he was doing it. He could have done that in a very different way, but he chose not to. He basically viciously attacked the party that he's been a member of and which has given him succor for years. I cannot respect that. It was really unpleasant watching that yesterday from a man I've known and respected for years. Rob, you did it wrong. And I'm sorry, I can't condone what he's done, and I certainly can't condone the way that he did it. And no, the Conservative Party isn't going to roll over. Kemi had no option but to sack him. Now, we're all perfect. I'm sure Kemi's made mistakes. At least she buys her own glasses. And we have a Labour government which is effectively a zombie government. We saw that in the House of Commons when they did their climb down on digital ID. Yet another U-turn.
Like the welfare U-turn as well?
Yeah, I mean, we're well over...
Farmers?
Yes, and by the way, who's campaigned tooth and nail on that? Victoria Atkins. I think it's fair to say that on the family farm tax, the Conservative Party truly led the charge. We led the charge against digital ID. We've led the charge in protecting Northern Ireland veterans. Mark, forgive me, I've been campaigning on that issue for 10 years. Now, if Reform want to help us, all well and good, but don't tell me they're the ones who came up with trying to stick up for people who served on Hot Banner. I've been making that argument for a decade.
Claire Coutinho's been great on net zero.
Yes.
But it's all too little too late for my viewers and listeners. That's the problem. I think that Kemi has been a successful leader. She's come of age. She's brilliant on PMQs. She's a true Conservative. I will give you that, which is why she might be over to Nigel at some point.
I very much doubt it.
The issue is that we didn't have this in 14 years of Conservative government, and I've got no doubt that you're as disappointed as most of the viewers and listeners of this show.
No, I don't accept for one moment that it was, sort of 14 wasted years. I'm not going to insult your intelligence and say
no, and that's
we
also
got everything right.
That's right. You're right to say that.
Yeah, but hang on, just two or three things. So education, everything that Gove did for the academy movement, most of our schools are now a lot better than they were. We've got the fourth highest schools in reading and arithmetic in the world now. That didn't happen by accident. On defence, I think I would have liked to have seen us spend more, but on Ukraine, and whatever you think of Boris, he was the first one out of the traps. He went to Kyiv, he backed Zelensky to the hilt. We've backed the Ukrainians, we've helped to keep them in the game.
The Tories restored the economy, repaired it in 2010. Yes. After the global meltdown.
Well, we inherited a country which was bankrupt.
It's not all bad.
No.
This is the party of Margaret Hilda Thatcher who transformed. Britain is still a rich country thanks to Mrs T.
Yes. Look, to your point, Mark, I started knocking on doors for the Conservative Party with a blue rosette in the 1980s under Margaret Thatcher. I learnt my trade canvassing on council estates in Basildon, right, including the one that I grew up on, in a right-to-buy house that my mother purchased after my father died because Margaret Thatcher gave working-class people an opportunity to do that. And when you knocked on a door in the 1980s wearing a blue rosette, it was a very straightforward process. The elector would open the door, they looked at the rosette, and they knew what the offer was. It was strong defences. It was curbing trade union power. It was supporting the police. It was a market economy. It was allowing people to buy their council houses. There was no doubt about what the brand was. Some people liked it and some people didn't. But you knew what you were buying. They knew why you were there, and even more importantly, you knew why you were there. You were on a mission to change your country, and Thatcher changed the world. She helped to win the Cold War with Ronnie Reagan. She helped to spread privatisation around the globe. It wasn't just domestically. You're quite right. I'd say she was our greatest ever peacetime Prime Minister. Churchill was arguably the greatest of the lot. Now, Kemi Badenoch, I've seen her at PMQs growing into that job. She now regularly bests Starmer every week. When you look at what's happening in the Commons, the Labour Party are in disarray. This government is dying on its feet. You see it every Wednesday. If you look across the chamber, Mark, you know, as I'm elected, I have the privilege of being at the match, as it were. If you look across the chamber, there's a small gang of loyalists who sit behind Starmer now. But other than that, he's completely lost the dressing room. You just got to look at the body language. They're sick and tired of him marching them up the hill and marching them down again, making these very controversial announcements. They go out into studios, they defend them. Then he does a U-turn and they're left hanging on the barbed wire. And the mood among Labour MPs is filthy. And most people suspect that by the summer there'll be a different Prime Minister. We just don't know who it's going to be. We'd love there to be a general election, but there won't be because Labour MPs, you know, turkeys don't vote for Christmas. So the next best thing is they're cancelling the local elections left, right and centre, particularly where there are Labour councils. Why? Because Labour are now consistently third in the polls. We're often second now, by the way. Labour are consistently third, and in some polls they're now fourth behind the Greens. They're a bit like, you know, brave Sir Robin in Monty Python. Brave, brave Sir Robin ran away. And they're terrified of the electorate. It's absolutely appalling that they should use the excuse of local government reorganisation to take away people's democratic right to vote. They should have a right to vote, and if they like the way that local government's being reorganised, they can vote for that, and if they don't, they can vote against it. They can express their opinion peacefully and democratically. That's what we fought wars for. So the Labour Party are in terrible trouble. They know it. Everyone knows it. The Conservative Party, yeah, the lights are still on. I would argue we're the ones that have forced that U-turn on family farm tax. We're the ones that have forced the U-turn on digital ID. We've already had half a U-turn on Northern Ireland because Labour were proposing to allow Gerry Adams to sue the government. We've got them to drop that. We got them to drop that, the Conservative Party. There's now going to be a crunch vote in the Commons next Wednesday where Labour on something called a remedial order. That means that Labour will allow civil prosecutions to begin again against our veterans. That is outrageous. The Conservative Party will fight that tooth and nail, and if Reform want to join us in the lobbies, they'll be welcome. So we're fighting for Northern Ireland veterans, and I say, forgive me, but I've been doing that for a decade. So if anyone else wants to come and help, they're very welcome. So that's where I think we are. The Tory party is alive and well. We're now second in most polls. We're clawing our way back from a very heavy defeat, but we're still here and we're still fighting on behalf of the British people. Now, people can choose who they want to vote for when there are elections. I hope that they will vote for us. All this talk about deals with Reform, Well, I can't see there being one at the moment. I think there's too much bad blood. On that, Nigel feels very strongly that we didn't say thank you in 2019 when he stood down his candidates in that election. And Boris therefore won by 80, and Nigel's got a point. There was all this talk about should we have given him a knighthood or should we have given him a peerage. We didn't even give him lunch. We didn't say thank you, and we should have done. And because of that, Nigel and Zia and some others are very angry with us as a party, and I get that. But I don't think that justifies the tone that Robert Jenrick adopted yesterday against his own former colleagues. I was personally really let down by Rob, and I think he's gone about this absolutely the wrong way. When he resigned from the Cabinet on a point of principle over the Rwanda bill, I admired it. What he did yesterday, quite the opposite.
I can hear the emotion in your voice. Do you feel hurt by his behaviour?
Yeah, look, I campaigned for the bloke. I was urging my colleagues and party voluntary members to vote for him. It never occurred to me in a million years that I was campaigning for a guy who was going to defect to another party. So, yeah, if you can hear the emotion in my voice, you're right. I feel personally very, very let down by Robert Jenrick.
Have you messaged him in the last 24 hours?
I'm not going to go into that.
No.
But I've not heard from him. I haven't spoken to him much over the past few months. He's certainly not tried in any way to get me to defect. We've honestly not had any conversation like that. But he drove. He did a long drive from a function over 100 miles away to come to my 60th birthday party last summer. He'd already had a long day, and he drove not quite through the night. He got there about 10:30 in the end, but it was a 60th birthday, and he turned up just as I was saying a few words. That was good of him to do that. But the same bloke who did that, the guy I campaigned for, the guy I eulogised for, yesterday threw it all back in the face of my party.
Is Nigel Farage and his success not a symptom of Conservative failure in office? Because as I mentioned in Dolan's dispatch, this is a party that whose two icons of the 20th century were Winston Churchill and Margaret Thatcher. And my view is that
just like me, Nigel Farage has got no monopoly of Winston Churchill or Maggie Thatcher, for God's sake.
No, but many feel that what I
went out canvassing for Maggie Thatcher for years.
Sure, but what many feel is that the legacy of Thatcher has been junked by the Conservatives, and the legacy of Blair has been perpetuated, whether it's the constitution or the legal structures of this country. ECHR, Human Rights Act, should have all been torn up by the Tories. And if we just go through it bit by bit, net zero, a thoroughly unconservative, unpragmatic idea. We all want to clean up the planet.
Well, Mark, look,
betting the house on flaky renewables, not conservative. Highest tax burden since the Second World War, not conservative. Illiberal lockdowns rather than the Florida approach, unconservative. Legal net migration of 1 million people, where 1 in 5 were born overseas. No one's against immigration. Very few people are racist in this country, but that number is too high. All on the watch of the Tories. That's why the lights are out and no one's home.
Well, no, as I said, Mark, the lights are still very much on. We're second in the polls. Reform, if you go back 6 months, were regularly polling in the mid-30s, and we were in the mid-teens. Now we're in the high teens, gusting 20. In a few polls we've been on 22 or 23. So let's say we're in the low 20s now. Reform are in the high 20s. They've been in the last couple of months. They've been going backwards in the national polls for various reasons. We could go through if you want, and we've been going forwards. So we're now consistently second. Now, I don't accept your rap sheet. I accept we got a number of things wrong, and we didn't do as well on immigration as we should have done, and I'm not going to try and pretend that we did. But it's a new party under new leadership, and we're working really hard. We're the ones who do the hard yards in the House of Commons.
I like Kemi Badenoch. I think she's a true Conservative. I admire you hugely. You're a brave and true Conservative. I think that it's a party that's done infinitely more good than ill in the course of its history. We wouldn't have this great country if it wasn't, in my view, for the Conservatives. I generally see the purpose of public life as the defeat of leftism on every front. I think socialism is a wretched ideology which has been proven through history not to work. The big issue is that record in office, the Boris wave, net zero, wokery in the public institutions, the chest feeders, the ECHR, and a rapidly changing society that my viewers and listeners feel they didn't vote for. And this is the big road hump that you guys have got to get over.
Well, as I say, I believe that we're learning from where we did go wrong. And you mentioned COVID. I did vote for lockdown originally,
but not the second and third.
Well, no, I became a lockdown sceptic as opposed to a Eurosceptic, and I was one of those who
because
was
you're a true Conservative.
Well, I just thought that the restrictions went on too long.
OK, well, listen, hold fire, because on the line is the former Conservative MP, former Home Office Minister and now Reform UK supporter, Ann Widdecombe. Ann, welcome to the show. Mark Francois in the studio, who's very, very clear that the Conservatives are very robustly Conservative. He doesn't think too much of the Reform UK project.
If the Conservatives were robustly Conservative, you wouldn't have the success that Reformers had. It would just be a fringe party. It is precisely because they are not robust. I mean, the fact is they play catch up the whole time. And right up to the election, they were saying, no, you can't leave ECHR, you can't leave ECHR. We say, yes, you can, and yes, we will. And suddenly Kemi says, oh, yes, we can leave ECHR. Now, that's only one example. But what I do know is this, that for 14 long years, and there's no way it was worse than the current government, but for 14 long years, we had a thoroughly unconservative government. You've picked out some of the things: net zero, the complete manic drive to control climate change, costing citizens for their boilers, for particular cars, etc. We've had a very, very unconservative 14 years. That's in addition to all the muddle and chaos and confusion of May and Truss and all the rest of it. Now, I like Mark Francois. He was always a friend of mine in Parliament. I admire Mark Francois, and he's doing a very good job this morning of defending the indefensible, which is the Conservative record.
Mark, over to you.
Anne, it's good to see you, Anne, and obviously I don't agree with what you've said, but Anne and I have always been friends, still are, I hope. Yep. And we have one great thing in common, is that we were both great friends of Sir David Amess. Now, let's leave aside the party politics for a moment. When I paid tribute to David in the House of Commons after his murder, I said he was quite simply the best bloke I ever knew. And I stand by that. So that is something that Anne and I'm sure, still have in common. But the lights are still on. I think you're going to see them burn more brightly. Never take the electorate for granted. David talked about that, Anne, he would always say that. David said, Mark, never take the electorate for granted. So we don't know what will happen at a general election more than 3 years from now. If Labour carry on like this, they're clearly not going to win it. I think the public already are desperate to get rid of them. So I don't think Labour will win. The question is who will, and what will be the colour and shape of that government, and that remains to be seen. But I don't know whether I'll play any part in that government or not. But if I do, it'll be as a Conservative.
Was Anne not the canary in the coal mine when she left the Conservative Party, I believe in 2019, in order to get the Brexit deal done?
Well, I think I kind of talked about that, Mark. Nigel did the right thing, and you could argue that in 2019, when he stood down his candidates in what was then the Brexit Party, you could argue that he put country before party. Now, I happen to know that he got a tremendous amount of abuse within his party when he did that. You know, some people had paid for their literature, it all metaphorically had to go in a skip. So some people were extremely angry with him and he took a lot of stick. And then what does the Tory party do? We don't say thank you. So if you're him, and I still would call Nigel a friend of mine, you've got a right to be blooming angry, frankly. So, and they still are, even all those years on. But that doesn't mean that, that to me still doesn't justify Robert Jenrick's tone and attitude yesterday.
Very, very briefly, because we know you have to run.
Yeah.
Anne, if you could stick around, we'll speak to you after the break. We'll finish this conversation. Just briefly, Robert Buckland, who I know is another good friend of yours, former Justice Secretary, has said that Robert Jenrick's remarks in recent months have been borderline racist. Would you agree with that?
I wouldn't agree with that, but what I would say, if Robert Buckland and I did the Oxford Union debate. You know, each year at the start of the term, they have the motion that this House has no confidence in His Majesty's government. We were up against a Labour peer and a Labour MP. We won. When was the last time the Tory party won a confidence vote debate in the Oxford Union? Well, we did, and it was Sir Robert Buckland and I. What did it?
Notwithstanding...
and by the way, while we were debating, the lights were still on.
Lights were still on. Well, the lights are still on with you, and you are a very red-blooded, or blue-blooded, if you like, Conservative, with great, great belief in the Conservative project and the leadership of Kemi Badenoch. That is a message received loud and clear. A message, Mark, that I hope you'll be propounding on the show in the months ahead, because yours is an important voice. My thanks to Mark Francois, Conservative MP, Shadow Defence Minister, Ann Widdecombe.